Welcome to Nerdarchy. For nerds, by nerds. I'm Nerdarchy Dave, and today I'm joined by Mark, Sherlock, Hulmes.
Hello,
Hulmes. We just discussed this and it's
Hulmes.
already falling out of my head. I'm terrible.
It's fine. It's so close to Holmes. It's spelt Hulmes. It's a silent. It's a weird surname. Don't worry about it.
I've got one myself. Mine last name is Friant, and we get Friant a lot, or Frint. But it's French, and I think there used to be like a mark in there to let people know where the accent was. But
So we're been lost and passed down over time.
yeah. Well, it's funny. I got married, so then my wife is always like correcting people. But I've gotten the wrong name for so long, I just don't bother anymore.
Amazing.
So how are you doing this evening?
I am doing good. Yeah, it's just about evening time over here in the UK. It's still nice and sunny though, which is quite nice. It makes a big difference here in the UK, having a bit of sunshine as opposed to rainy doom and gloom. But no, doing very, very well. Been very, very busy with lots of D&D stuff. But yeah, doing well. How are you? I hope things are all good across the pond with you.
We're doing good. I must say, when I was over in the UK last year, I loved the weather there. Right? Like
We have some. I know it's a rare thing for some states. I know, but we actually have some weather here, which is surprising.
like here, in the summertime, it is so hot. Even when I was over there in September, and we were over there for D&D in a castle,
Yeah.
and it was like 50, 60 degrees all the time. I was like in my glory. I tend to run hot, so it was like a beautiful
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, no, it's always a thing whenever Matt Mercer would come over, because he would come over for conventions and we'd hang out and stuff like that, and he would honestly, if it rained, he'd just light up in amazement. He'd be like, "Rain! I
Yeah.
haven't seen rain in so long," and just absolutely love it. And I think like any of my American friends, whenever they come over, it's like a blessing, especially those from LA, just to see different temperatures and different climates that isn't just hot and
We've got
dry.
two in New Jersey.
Oh,
We've got
okay, yeah.
hot and cold, right? There's
That's
like
it.
you get like 2 or 3 days of spring and fall, and that's it. You're done. We
I
do
love
get
it.
rain though. We do get rain.
Yeah, lots of that. Yeah. No, yeah, it's I think it's we're very blessed in that, when we have a good summer, it's good. They're just very rare. It's,
Yeah.
when we have a good summer, it's lovely. Just not all the time.
Yeah. So, where, just in case anyone doesn't know what it is that you do, what
Yeah.
is it you do? Give us the
What
elevator pitch for
my
high rollers.
Yeah, my spiel. I call this my podcast spiel, because this is always the kind of like opener of like, tell people what you do and stuff like that. So my name is Mark Hulmes. I go by Sherlock Hulmes online. I am the dungeon master for a D&D show called High Rollers D&D, which is a UK live play Twitch Dungeons and Dragons show. It's all homebrew, so it's not set in the Forgotten Realms. It's all my own campaign worlds and stuff like that. We've just recently started doing some more module stuff. We're doing Curse of Strahd at the moment as well, which is like an extra stream. I'm also now, I can say, this is one thing I've not been able to talk about on podcasts up until now, but I'm now also the Dungeon Master for Knights of Evening Star, which is a brand new official D&D live stream over on the D&D Twitch channel. That's only just started. We're on episode 5 of that, I think. And then also I do a little bit of YouTube here and there. I'm actually hoping to have a new YouTube project coming out this year. And you may also know me as Caliana on Critical Role. Those are kind of like my big things, my big elevator things that people are interested in, I guess.
And as always, you can look to the description to find some links. And once this is no longer live, they'll be in the pinned post or pinned comment as well, so you can check that
Amazing.
all out.
Thank you very much.
So, how did you get into gaming?
Yeah, I mean, I think like for a lot of guys who are into D&D, especially like for me, it started the classic way, right? Me and my friends, teenagers, we found the 3rd edition D&D box set in our local kind of comic shop. It wasn't really a gaming shop. It was more focused on comics and manga, and it had a little bit of board games and Warhammer and stuff like that in it. And they had the 3rd edition D&D starter box. And we all basically were like, oh man, I've heard of D&D. D&D sounds really cool. And we were into like, MUDs, which are like these online RPGs, like text-based RPGs. We were into LARPing and Warhammer, and we were like, yeah, we should play D&D. So we all kind of pitched them in our money. We got our lunch money together, and we all kind of like pitched it all in. And we bought the box set, ran home with it, opened it up, and then all of my friends were like, "Oh man, there's a lot of rules in this." And we were like, "Oh," and we're like looking through the book, and because it was just that because they'd come back to my house. I ended up keeping the box at my place. I read through all the rules and I was like, okay, well, I think I can be the dungeon master. And and we got it all wrong and it was just completely a mess. And, I gave out way too much gold and magic. It was, our first campaign was like so many where it was a complete mess, but we loved it so much. And then that just became mine and my friends group's thing that we did. Every day after school, we'd finish school, we'd go home, eat food, run to somebody's house. We'd rotate around and we would be there for 5-6 hours playing D&D every night. And that was our life for like 2-3 years through high school. Yeah, I think like a lot of people have a very similar kind of start to it, basically. And because none of us had played before, we didn't have anybody to show us the rules or like, be an example DM. We were figuring it out as we went. So, we really just had our own style of doing everything and just kind of had to figure it all out. And this was in the age of 3rd edition where there was a billion prestige classes and feats and there was a whole mishmash of everything going on. But then eventually when we all kind of moved away from home and we stopped going to school and I got my first job, D&D became my way of getting to know people at like my job or my housemates. And that became like my next kind of thing where I would, meet a bunch of new people who were all nerds because we were all working for video games companies or, into the same things. And I'd be like, hey, have you guys ever played D&D? I could run D&D for you. And then that became like our social activity that we did. So I've been playing it probably since I was about 14, 15. And I don't think I've ever really stopped. It's, there's always been a game or a session that's been going on a regular basis since then.
I've just envisioned you in new environments ambushing people with D&D.
It's not even a joke. It's so true. Like at new jobs, I would basically be, the type of people because it'd be like the guys playing WoW on their lunch break or the people who've got like the Warhammer miniatures. And I'd be like, okay, yeah, I've got these guys. So
he's wearing a Conan t-shirt or Transformers or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
and working in a games company as well. That was pretty much everybody. And like, there was a couple of girls who were really into their cosplay and stuff like that. I was like, yeah, okay, I think I've got this. And so I would go out and reach out to these groups and be, just be like, hey, have you guys ever played? Have you ever had any interest in playing? I could run a game, and that became our social activity. And then that's that. It just hasn't stopped then since, really, And I still do it to this day. Whenever I go to like a wedding and somebody inevitably asks me what I do, I'll do the whole sales pitch of like why you should play role playing games.
See, I remember like in my 20s, there was still a lot of stigma around playing, around playing D&D. So you're always looking and using like code to figure out if you could get a nibble or a bite. To see if people were into it or not. It's just kind of like, we would joke about like, hey, you got some D20. Do you know where to get the D20? The good D20.
Hey, man, do you know where I can get any of those D20s? Yeah. I think we were quite lucky because in the UK, D&D didn't really have the same stigma. Like, I don't think it ever had the kind of whole, like, devil worshipping thing. It was just like a nerdy hobby that nobody really knew. It was kind of like Games Workshop Warhammer. And, in my school, I went to a very rough school. I grew up in a very rough part of the UK, and we were just kind of left alone. We're just like, just leave the nerds. They're just doing their own thing, and we were really left to it. So we were really lucky, I think, in that there wasn't so much of that stigma, so you could kind of pick out people a bit easier for that sort of thing.
Nice. So how do you go from being a fan of the hobby and playing and kind of an ambassador to hobby in your personal life to doing it kind of for a living?
Yeah, I that really begins. So I think for me, that really starts with, so I was working as the social media manager for a YouTube company called the Yogscast, who do a bunch of like gaming videos and stuff like that. And my partner she's a illustrator for them. And I started working for them, and every year they do this big charity event across all of December called the Jingle Jam, where they do all sorts of streams every different day. All of it's being raised money for charity. And at the time when I joined the company, Crit Role had just started, and me and Matt Mercer have been friends for a very, very long time. And so I was like really excited about the show and watching it and supporting them. And part of this charity event is the guys who run the Yogscast, the owners were like, hey, would you like to do a D&D thing or something like that? And so I was like, yeah, that sounds great. I'd love to do that. That'd be a really different thing to do. So I got a couple of my friends who were also YouTubers and streamers, and I ran, it wasn't actually originally D&D for them. I ran a Star Wars Fantasy Flight game for them. So using the Fantasy Flight system, we did a Star Wars adventure. It was very, very silly, very over the top, ridiculous, but people loved it, and it was genuinely a super really successful stream. People really liked it. It was the first time that people had really seen me on camera, and people were like, oh, this guy seems pretty cool, and he does funny voices, lol. And so when the charity events all finished, we asked, well, could we do a regular show, like a regular stream on the channel? And, there was a bit of sort of like, well, yeah, okay, yeah, we'll let you do it. Like, but if it doesn't do very well, we'll probably have to ask you guys to stop. And it was like, yeah, that's fair enough. It'll probably be a couple of months and then we'll close it all down. We were very wrong. People really like D&D on Twitch. And yeah, this High Rollers was started and it hasn't stopped. It was so successful, so much more than we ever thought it would be. And it just became this thing. And, it was very, very successful. And I think the fact that it was one of the biggest in the UK and Europe specifically got us the attention of Wizards of the Coast and other kind of streaming shows. We were invited to be guests on stuff. And it really just took off from there. And now I find myself in the position where it's my full-time job and this is my career basically is running High Rollers and doing my own D&D related content. So it's kind of a dream come true story. It was a real sort of opportunity meets a lot of preparation, running a lot of games, being very experienced as a GM, and then just the right opportunity coming along, and then that sort of taking off, really.
It definitely beats working for a living, that's for sure.
Oh yeah.
Which I say that very tongue-in-cheek, knowing very well that you probably work way more hours now than you ever did.
Yeah, there's definitely, but it's that kind of thing, isn't it, though? Like, you don't ever feel like you're working. Like, I'll sit down and I'll spend sort of like hours on a Sunday getting the session ready and getting everybody prepped and then running the games, and then doing all the business stuff during the week. But honestly, it doesn't feel like work. And then that sounds so corny and cheesy. I get it, but it really is true. Like, when I sit down to run those games, it's honestly just me and my friends playing D&D. We just happen to put some cameras on us and people watch it and they enjoy it. And that makes us some money. And it's just amazing. It's genuinely incredible. I couldn't ask for anything better, really.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot of fun to be a creator and be able to do that thing that you love. I mean, like when we started Nerdarchy, it was kind of like, hey, if we made this a company and a business, there'd be an excuse for us to play D&D all the time or do these things that we haven't been doing as much as we used to. And so, like, in the beginning, it was like a way for us to perpetrate the scam on our wives. And they're like, yeah, we're working.
Yeah, definitely. And making characters and stuff. Yeah.
So that's been a lot of fun. So are you always the DM or do you get to play as well? I know you've done some guest appearances as a player with Crit Roll.
Yeah, I've done some guest appearances as a player, but I am branded with the forever DM curse. And it's not a curse. I love it. I love DMing. People always ask me, like, what do you prefer? Do you prefer playing or DMing? And my answer is genuinely both. I love being a player. I love not having to do as much preparation and instead get to experience somebody else's worlds and work. But there is something incredible, especially because I love doing homebrew. I think because I don't really run modules, like, I love DMing. I love making worlds. I love making NPCs. I just love it, every second of it. So yeah, always the DM, but a very happy, always forever DM.
Yeah, we're the same way as far as we tend to do more homebrew and rarely run pre-written stuff. I am just finally playing in Curse of Strahd, and
it's a good one.
Yeah, and that's the first. These are the first like official adventures I've played in 5e so far. Everything has been homebrew, and like I don't know. Are you like a prep DM or an improv DM?
I would say I'm more of a prep DM, but I think because I have a background in like theater and I wanted to be an actor when I was younger, the improv comes quite easily to me. So if the players do something completely off the rails, I'm generally pretty good at going along with it. But I like having and as a prep DM, it's not like I have pages and pages of like full written up descriptions or notes. It's normally like 2 or 3 pages of bullet points, and it's just like, okay, yeah, if they do this, I'm going to do this thing, and if they do that, I'll do that. But I tend to be more of a prep DM. And even when I've been doing the module stuff, we've been running Curse of Strahd, I've heavily modified it. Like I went in and I've changed loads of it and I've made big sweeping, big changes to it because I can't help myself. I'm like, no, I've got to play with it. I've got to add in my own little spice and flavor. So it kind of keeps it fresh for me, I think.
Yeah, this looks good, but once I take the chainsaw to it, it'll be much better.
Well, it didn't help that I just finished watching Netflix's Castlevania just before we wanted to run Curse of Strahd.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh man, all this hell stuff is really cool. I'm going to put loads of that in it. It's
Nice.
just like, cramming in loads of Castlevania-esque stuff in there as well. So
Yeah, that's actually why I don't run official stuff, is because I feel like to run it right, you have to get in there and you have to read it a couple times, and then you have to change it to fit your players and the games that you usually run. It feels like more work to me than just making my own stuff up.
I think like I found a good balance where I'm not changing everything, but I'm changing enough to keep it fresh for me and the players. But it's definitely less work than my very complicated homebrew world, which is absolutely my own fault for making it way, way too complicated. So that's kind of like my break game each week.
So anyone, if you have questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. Just put question in front of it so we can pick them out. Brian wants to know, how do you think D&D will change as more people come to know it through watching it played versus knowing it through reading or conversation, basically the way we learned it?
Yeah. I think it's that's a really good question. I think that, I mean, if you look at other tabletop role-playing games, right? Like I love looking at other RPGs, especially indie games and new products coming out. And I think that what we're seeing, and you saw this in 5e from 4e and 30, like there is a general simplification and more of a focus on the narrative and the storytelling elements of the game. And I think we're probably going to see more and more of that kind of being introduced into the game, where it's a little bit more open, because I think that's the wonderful part of the streaming side of things. Is before, like when me and you learned to play, it was reading books and figuring it out and saying, right, okay, well, this rule says when I grapple somebody, I do this, I do that, and do that. Whereas I think when people are watching it, they're seeing the fiction first and then the rules come later. So they're seeing the player like saying, I want to grab this guy and pick him up and throw him to the side and stuff like that, which is what gets their imagination going. And then the DM is like, okay, make a this check. And that's normally the DM kind of keeps all of the minutia hidden. And the players who are watching it are just seeing the very simplification process, the simplified process. I think we might see more of that stuff in the future. I think a lot of people talk about like, oh, do you think RPGs will have rules that are tailored towards streaming? I kind of hope not. Like, I know some people are quite keen on that idea. I like the idea that the game is designed to be played with your friends at home around a table with some beers first. And then if people want to, they can put some cameras on it and it can be a fun experience afterwards. Like, I think I prefer that as opposed to like trying to merge the two worlds together too closely.
Well, if you think about it too, like the number of people that actually stream RPGs is very small in comparison
Super small
to the number of people playing. So that, it doesn't even really make a lot of sense to do it that way.
Yeah, it's just, you just worry about marketing sort of like mindsets getting too involved into the development. But yeah, you're 100% right in that, there's hundreds of thousands of people playing at home that never even dream of streaming their games. And that's ultimately where I think it's the most fun. I think that's, even with High Rollers, even with our stream, I've always kind of pushed the element to it with the players and the audience that I want it to feel like a game that's at home. I want it to feel like a home game where there's just happens to be a couple of cameras on us. We make stupid jokes. We're not very professional. We make mistakes. Like, I want it to feel natural. I don't want it to feel like a produced show. Do you know what I mean?
So when we started Nerdarchy, we started like putting up some of our games. Now we don't bother because so many people are doing it so well. I like it was literally just like a webcam at one end of the table, and we would just hit record.
Yeah.
And but and even then I was like mystified that people would watch those, and people still ask. Like at some point we just stopped recording them and just kept playing, and people were like, hey, are you ever gonna put up the rest of these games? I'm like,
these
what?
adventures.
They were so terrible. Like the camera angle was terrible, the noises were like eating pizza, and like it was literally like just our like home game.
It's weird, isn't it? I feel like we always talk about it, and the thing that people always tell me that they like about like high rollers and that style of game where it does feel more natural at the table when it's just here's a bunch of friends playing a game. And I think like for a lot of people, it's people who don't have their own home games. It kind of feels like they're part of it, like they're at the table with you and they're actually like on the adventure with you, even if they're not participating. It's as close as to it that they can get, and I think that's kind of amazing. Like I remember thinking back, I was really lucky to have a regular gaming group, but I remember like periods where like my friends would go away for a holiday and we wouldn't play, and I'd just be like, what am I supposed to do with myself? I don't have D&D. What do I do? So the idea of like people that don't have a regular game, at least having something that they can feel a part of, I think is amazing.
That's a good point. How long has your group been together?
So High Rollers has been going for 4 years. This is where I don't actually know off the top of my head. I'm pretty sure it's 4 years. I think we just had our 4th year going. And then before then it was like my school group, my group from school, we played together for a few years, and then I kind of jumped around between like colleague groups. But yeah, High Rollers is about 4 years now, so playing every week, sometimes twice a week when we've done like extra shows and stuff like that. So yeah, we know each other pretty well now.
So with that group, were you playing together before High Rollers, or did it kind of form for High Rollers?
So I played with myself and Chris Trott, who's a member of High Rollers. Me and him were playing in games together. So when I moved to Bristol, which is where we currently live, and for the new job, he was a group of mates that I basically became friends with, and I was running D&D for those guys privately. And it was me and him who kind of put forward the idea of like, hey, we could do a stream show of this. And then we started thinking about like, well, who could we bring in? And we knew that our friend Kim, who was a good friend of ours, had always wanted to play, but had never had. She'd played when she was younger, like 2nd edition, I think, or 3rd edition, when she was in her goth teenage years. Mm-hmm. And she'd played then, but hadn't played since. And so it was like, yeah, I'd love to play again. So we brought her in, and then Chris's partner at the time, Katie, wanted to play because she had watched Critical Role and was really interested in it so she was like the new generation, the new blood who had seen things like Crit Role and Penny Arcade and was interested in it from that end. And then the last member that we brought in, he's left High Rollers now, but Matthew, who joined us, he had never played D&D. He knew nothing about D&D, but he was a theater guy. He was like a guy who was massively into his theater and his acting. And we just thought, I was just like, I bet he'd love it. I bet he would love it if we brought him into this game. So we brought him in, and we were all friends. We all knew each other and hung out like at the pub and stuff like that, but we hadn't played properly together except for me and Chris. But there was just like, you get the first 2 episodes out of the way and people are learning the game, and then it just clicked and everybody just had a really good sort of like synergy, and it just really, really worked well.
So, I mean, it was already an existing friend group. You just hadn't necessarily all played D&D together.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's all. That's like, I don't know. I'm sure you guys get tons of questions and messages and emails, and so you get all these like bizarre questions, and I'm always like, well, who are you guys playing this game with? Like, maybe you should try playing it with your friends, or people you want to be friends with, because like. A lot of the questions you get are like social interaction questions, more so than about the game. It's like, how do I make this person do that? I'm like, generally, you can't make anyone do anything.
Oh, man. Yeah, like whenever I do streams and I do Q&As, number one question is like, there's a problem. How do I make it? You look on things like the D&D subreddit or the Facebook groups, and it's always the same problems. It's always, this player is a problem player. How do I deal with this person who's cheating? How do I deal with this person who won't share the spotlight? And it's because I think people do forget that at the end of the day, D&D is a social game, and there are these social rules, and if you're not friends with everybody, and I get that not everybody has the luxury to play with like a close group of friends, maybe you've got to play at a game store, maybe you've got to play online with people you didn't know, but there's always other people out there. Like my biggest advice is like, look, if you can't, if talking to the person doesn't fix things, if they can't like work with you or compromise with you to like make it enjoyable for everyone at the session, find other people. Like, it's just, you need to find the right people to play with, because it makes the experience 100% better.
Yeah, like I think if you go in with the mindset, you're not so much that you're going to play D&D or another game, but you're going to find new friends.
Yeah.
I think you're going to have a better experience
Oh,
overall
100%.
when you can connect with the people at the table. So we got a bunch of questions that came in.
Sure.
So the top two that I see right now are from Shrike and Rakame, and they are both about the new book. What part of Tasha's Cauldron for Everything are you both looking forward to seeing? What are your thoughts on the new book? Are you excited to use and expand the new race rules? So what are your thoughts on the new book?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's one of those ones where I kind of put my thoughts a little bit on Twitter, but I think for me, the most exciting stuff, it's quite funny. A few weeks before they announced the book, I put a thread up on Twitter that kind of got quite a lot of speed to it, where I was saying, oh, I really wish there were more books from Wizards that were DM resources. Like, we've got, like, you know, the adventures, we've got stuff like Xanathar's Guide. We've got all this UA stuff of new classes and feats and all of that kind of stuff coming out. But for me, I'd love to see, you know, a throwback to things like the Book of Challenges from 3rd edition, like a book which is just, here's a bunch of really cool encounters and puzzles that you can put in your game. You know, the Manual of the Planes, which is just, here's a bunch of information about the planes and a bunch of ideas. I'd love to have seen more of that stuff. And then they announced Tasha's, and a big part of that is like, hey, here's like expanded rules for group patrons. Here's a bunch of puzzles. Here's like how to handle his optional ideas for like how to handle monster interactions and social elements. And that's the stuff where I'm just like, I'm so glad that they're putting more of this stuff out there, because as we get more new DMs, you know, a lot of this stuff that for experienced GMs like us, it's second nature, right? Like, we know how, if the monsters want to try and talk to the monsters instead of, you know, kill them, we can improvise, or we know a way of doing that. But a new GM might not have any idea. So having something that can give them a guideline of like, well, you know, here's a rough idea of what you could do, I think is amazing. Having like a bunch of traps that you can just put in, or puzzles that you can just drop into your campaign, super useful. So I'm really excited about that. And then I think, yeah, the next biggest one for me is the optional, I'm calling it the ancestry one, because I know that's what Pathfinder call it, and I'm assuming it's going to follow a similar vein, but like kind of the ancestry culture variants for the races. I think that's going to be a great addition, and it's definitely a part of the game where I think it'd be good to see more evolutions like that as we go. What about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely parts of the games that haven't changed in the past like 40 years at all. Yeah. It's been locked in stasis. So yeah, it's always interesting to see where they go with those things. Yeah, I'm more interested in seeing the things that I don't know about and how they handle it. Like, all the player options are going to be great, but we kind of seen a version of them in the UAs. Yeah. So seeing what else comes out, the things that you mentioned, and anything that I don't know. We have a pretty extensive write up over on the website. But I didn't write it, so I don't actually know what's in there yet. Yeah. So, you know, I'm looking forward to opening the book and being surprised and seeing the things that I didn't know were going to be in there.
For sure. I get that as well. And yeah, like the UA stuff, again, it's like, yeah, like you said, we've seen parts of it. You know, I've been using a bunch of them in my games, so I'm kind of familiar with them already. So yeah, I definitely, I agree. I'm looking forward to stuff that I don't know about already, or stuff that I think is going to be useful for new people.
Yeah, you know, it sounds like the best part about that stuff is it kind of gives new GMs permission to do things in their game. Because you always see, like, Jeremy Crawford gets bombarded with these questions, and they're all like asking permission to play the game however that particular person wants to play it. And you know, we did a video kind of tongue in cheek. Jeremy Crawford is not the boss of my D&D. Like, and you know, it says it in the books. It always has. The creators, you know, will say the same thing. And I even talked to Jeremy and told him we were going to do that video beforehand, and he got a kick out of it. But you know, the idea is it's your game, make it your game, and you can do what you want. You don't need permission.
And the thing is it's actually one of the parts I love the most. Like, I love coming up with homebrew rules. I love modifying, like, I've started doing it in our main High Rollers games, where I've started using the variant rules in the DMG, like the degrees of success. I use my own kind of broken version of skill challenges. Changed my critical rules. I have an injury table that I use, and that stuff for me is the most fun. And it's all tailored around what my players think is fun. Stuff that I know they get a kick out of, I get a kick out of. And it's okay to change that stuff. Like, I've never understood this, like you said, I've never understood this idea of like, you must play exactly as written by raw, only in the book. This is exactly how you play, because that's only going to limit you. And this is a game which is about being beyond limitations. It's about, creating stories and adventures that your imagination's going to fill. And I think it's a shame to limit that to like, well, you can only do this, certain thing, and no, you can't chop off his head and stuff like that. And obviously balance needs to be a part of it, but yeah, I think that playing around with stuff is fine.
I think some of it comes from, for me anyway, like the way I learned. Like there was someone that taught me how to play the game. In AD&D, the rules were kind of loose to begin with, or if, like you said, you grabbed the box and you started reading the rules and taught yourself how to play, like so a lot of things you just had to figure out and make up. So you were already doing that anyway, and then you would run into other people that you didn't know that plays the game, and they're like, oh, they do it a completely different way anyway, or and who knows which one of you got the rules right or wrong. It's just how your group did it, right?
Exactly. And you know what? This is where the whole like streaming D&D has added another layer of complication to this, which is we get it on a daily basis, where I have to constantly remind the audience sometimes, like either in chat or in comments, and be like, hey, I know that this is what the rule said. This is the way we do it. This is what's fun for us. Or like, yeah, I changed that rule. Or, oh, I made a mistake. I didn't realize that because I haven't sat down and memorized the rule book. And having streamed games where people can leave YouTube comments, there's a lot of people who will be like, oh, you did this wrong, blah, 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 blah. They'll try and correct you and stuff. And I think that that's not helping that kind of culture of just like, you can change this stuff. It's okay. It's okay to change it. As long as the players are having fun and you're having fun as the GM, that's totally fine to do.
And then you're going to get the other end of it, the part that we don't see. And that's when players are going back to their games and going, well, Mark does it this way, or Matt
that is
does
a problem.
It that
yes,
way.
That is a problem, and that's where again, I think it's for creators in our positions to say, this is how we do it. That doesn't mean your GM's going to do it this way. It also doesn't mean that the way your GM doing it is necessarily, what's fun for you. Talk to them. If you like the way that Matt or me or Jeremy does this rule, talk to your GM, suggest it. And if they say no, accept that. That's how they want to run their game. But yeah, it's definitely a double-edged sword there of just, we're creating these very interesting situations that I don't think anybody's had to worry about before, for sure.
Or, one of the things I always say, you always have the opportunity to you yourself get behind the screen and run it that way.
Absolutely.
If that's the way you want to do it.
That's the way you want to do it. Run it that way. That's definitely a big thing that I think more people need to say is like, hey, if you don't like the way the game's being run, pick up a screen and get behind it, and build your own thing. It's daunting. It's scary. I get that a lot of people are put off DMing because it is intimidating. It's a lot of work, but it's also a hell of a lot of fun. And you get to really do things the way that, you think is going to be best for you and your players. So.
Yep. At the end of the day, you can put your money where your mouth is, and it is a lot of fun. It is rewarding. And the thing that I like about DMing is like it gives you a creative outlet. Maybe you can't. Maybe you're not a good artist. You're not. You can't draw. You can't perform. You can't play an instrument. So you can't be creative in those ways. But like almost anybody can tell stories. Everybody can tell stories, right? And it's one of those things you can get better at as you do it the more often.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
So that's one of the things I like about it. I'm going to dive back into the chat. IO Dinosaur, do you feel any extra pressure for your world building or plots because it's been streamed? Do the audience ever run with or do the audience? So basically, you ever run with an idea from the audience and explore it, even though you had no intention of doing that?
That's a good question. I don't think I would ever take an idea from the audience and implement it into the game. And there's a specific reason for that for me is I wouldn't ever want to be doing Twitch plays D&D. right? I don't want to have a game which is, Twitch is creating the world and making the decisions. Because it's like you said, this is a game for me and my friends. And I know my friends better than Twitch chat knows them. I know the kind of stuff that they're going to engage with best. I know the stuff that I'm going to enjoy the most. And that's a very different type of thing. I think if you wanted to do a game where, Twitch chat made suggestions for your world building and you incorporated it, you could absolutely do that. And I know that some GMs and games have done that in the past, but that's not my kind of game. My kind of game is, like you said, part of the fun for me is creating the worlds and developing it all myself. In terms of the bit about feeling pressure, knowing that there's an audience in the world building, I'd like to say no, but in reality, there probably is subconscious stuff. Especially where I am trying to be a bit more inclusive, and I'm trying to make sure that, like, if I'm thinking of an NPC, I will try and think and be like, how many, like, have I had a lot of male NPCs recently? Should I kind of, add some more diversity, or should I make this a bit differently? Is this going to upset anybody if I make this NPC that way? And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that it's good that I'm thinking of those things, but I think I do that a little bit subconsciously now when I'm actually world building, because I know that this isn't just for me and my players, that other people are enjoying it and watching it. And I want them to feel included, and I want them to feel comfortable and safe watching it as well. So I think that is genuinely a thing that I do think about now. That's probably not an answer people want to hear, because they're like, no, you should, be true. But I think that as a content creator, you have a responsibility to that audience to make sure that they feel welcome in the show as well. And so I want to do that. So
yeah, as far as adding things to the game, minor details occasionally, and it's usually just because I was like, oh, that's interesting or that's funny, and it might be. It's usually like something like someone suggests like a certain type of drink in a tavern, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
stuff
really
like
small
that.
things
Like that. But I don't need the audience or the chat to change my game, because the players are going to do that anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's also like why I became more of an improv DM anyway, not because I have a background in theater, or I was doing improv before. I just gave up. Like I was defeated, right? I would write all of this prep, and I would use maybe a paragraph or none of it, and it's like just throw it away because my players are just going to do whatever. And as a DM, that's just one of the things that that we learn to deal with.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So Tyler wants to know, do you have any favorite personal table rules?
I think that the one that's created some of the most interesting gameplay stuff that we've had in our main homebrew campaign at the moment at Rois is we've added an injury tables rule. So and the way it works is when somebody gets reduced to 0 hit points, they make a Constitution saving throw. The DC is either 10 or half the damage they took from the attack. And then basically, if they fail, you roll a d20, and then there's a list of critical injuries that you get, very similar to how other games have done it and stuff like that. And I created this rule. Initially, I created it because I was a little bit sick of the way that in D&D it kind of became whack-a-mole, where somebody would go down, somebody would heal them, they'd be on like 15 hit points, I'd knock them down again, they'd get healed, they'd come back up, and there'd be no consequences to it. They'd just be like, oh, yeah, they're just fine, they take a long rest, no problem. But it also came about because I know that one of my players, two of my players, Tom and Rhiannon, they love bad stuff happening to their characters. They love it. Like the idea of them losing an arm and stuff, they were like, yeah, I love it. Get more, punish me. So I was just like, okay, they'll get a kick out of this. But it's become one of my favorites because I forget about it all the time, where like a PC will go down and I'll just not realize. But Tom, my player, will point it out every single time, to the annoyance of the other players, which is very funny for me. It's like, he'll just be like, Mark, I'm just going to remind you that there's an injury check on that save. And I'll be like, oh, you're right, Tom. Thank you. Yeah, can you roll it? And they'll just be like, and they'll groan about it. And I just find that very personally. It's like one of those little jokey things amongst friends. But it's also created some really fun game situations where players have had to get like rituals, or they've had people wanting to craft like mechanical limb replacements and stuff, and I think it's made like a really fun game. It's also added a bit to the survival of it. There was a period where one of the characters had a broken leg and they had to like get through this dangerous wildlands, and it just made the challenge, it made it more challenging and more interesting for them. So I think that's definitely been one of the fun ones.
What's the most grievous wound?
So I've been updating it. So because we've been playing with this system for 2 years, and I've slowly been tweaking it. And at the moment, in the current version of the rules, I think it's on a 1. It's something like, it's called like mortal injury, and it's basically that character is basically every turn they have to make a save, or they're reduced to 0 hit points, and they can't be healed until this injury is like repaired. And so it's like that's like on a 1. Like if you get this, it's kind of a you better hope that somebody can get to you and save you, or this is probably it for that character. And I think that adds a real sort of like ooh kind of moment to the game. But it's always changing. Like it's one of those things where it doesn't come up super often. So maybe that's too strong, maybe that's not, maybe that's a bit too unbalanced, and I'll just change it if it is. So we'll just fix it. But I think that that's the most gruesome, sort of like the worst player one anyway, on there. And then it just changes in degrees from 1 to 20.
I find our group is terrible about using home rules. We'll even come up with them and then just not use them.
Yeah, we do that. I do that all the time. I just forget about them in the moment of like chaos of like NPCs and monsters and the players and like all the plots going on. It goes over my head. But luckily, I have a player who will always call me out on it.
Yeah, like we've experimented with crits where we've done things like, well, the first set of dice is all maxed out, and then you roll.
We do that one as well. Yeah.
Which that was a little problematic because it's way more beneficial to certain classes than others, like the rogue or the paladin.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, oh well, maybe we should just do the weapon type. But though, like that came about just because it stinks. You get a crit and then you roll double 1s on your damage, and it's like worse than
it's less than what. Yeah, exactly. We do the same thing. That's why we change the crit rules in the same way. Like we switch to this new system, the exact same system of max damage dice and then roll again. Because of that, like, oh, it really stinks when you roll a crit and it's like, that's less damage than my normal attack. But you're 100% right. Like, we have a paladin in the party, and I don't think she's crit on a smite yet, but I'm just waiting for the day that she does. We did have the sorcerer crit on like a 5th level chromatic orb or something, and it was hideous damage. It was like, oh, but I've always said to them, like, well, the monsters get to do this to you guys too. So
the eye opener was the rogue, when our rogue did it, and he did like over 100 points of damage with one crossbow shot.
Well, especially if you add like an assassin rogue who it's like, oh, they're surprised, automatic crit, damage. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the D20s just start raining from the sky.
But that's the thing, is I think like with stuff like that, like you could get hooked up on like, you could get upset that like, oh, that's really unfair, that favors a player. And it's like, well, you can just change it. Like if it turns out to be unfair and unbalanced in the game, you just say, okay, yeah, we hadn't thought about that, we're just going to roll back to the way of doing it before. And it's nobody loses out really. It's just you're trying different things to make it more fun for everyone. And if not everybody's having fun, you change it and you just fix it. So,
but I will say, like, I guess my favorite one, and we have consistently started doing, it's super specific, but Dragonborn, we allow them use their breath weapon as a bonus action.
That seems, that actually does make sense. I feel like Dragonborn are really, I don't know, I don't tend to get too much into the optimal min-maxing stuff, but like looking at Dragonborn, they do seem to be a bit more, just not as good. Like they've got cool RP and cool visuals, but I feel like their stats and abilities just kind of feel a bit flat. I don't know. Maybe that's just me.
It is. And like eventually you get to the point, and it doesn't take very long. It's like pretty much anything you could do is better than using that breath weapon.
Yeah.
But
a bonus action, it suddenly is like, oh, well, I can attack, 2-3 times and then breath weapon as well. Yeah. And it's like, is it long rest a breath weapon or is it short rest?
It's short rest. It's short rest.
Okay, that's not too bad. Okay.
And it's not even like that much damage where it's like... No,
it's like 2d6 or something, isn't it?
Yeah, and it scales, but so it's like, as a bonus action, that's fine. Like, if I'm a fighter, why would I ever want to, not take 3-4 attacks and just breathe instead? It's like...
Yeah. Or like use second wind and stuff like that instead of get hit points back. Yeah, it does seem pretty stupid.
Yeah, but so that's like I said, we have not done too many. So do you play any non-stream games, or is everything being streamed?
I dabble. So because at the moment I run 3 stream games a week, I don't have a lot of time for non-stream games. But there's what I tend to try and do is sort of every month. I do get in some. I was playing in a regular non-stream game with some completely different group of friends than my LARP group, and we were playing in a game where I was a player and it was being DM'd by somebody else, and that was fairly regular. I've had to stop that because I'm just too busy at the moment. But that was really fun, and that was kind of a really good game to play in. And then I did play a little bit of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay for a little bit as well. I ran like a short Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay session, which was really fun. I like playing other systems. Whenever I do like offline games, I like doing other systems because I feel it's a great way to expand, your ideas for rules and your ideas of how to manage certain situations by playing these different systems, because they do it all so differently. But yeah, like the D&D campaign I was in, the non-stream game I was in, I was a player. I had a druid Circle of the Stars gnome, which was a lot of fun to play. She was a very hyperactive Sailor Moon-esque druid, which was a lot of fun, especially in a party full of a very grumpy Warforged and Triton. So that was a lot of fun to do.
Sailor Moon gnome that's just funny concept to me for some reason. I don't know why.
That's my jam. That's like 100% my jam. Give me like, crazy magical transformation gnome druid and I'm there. I'm in. That's me all the way through.
So Oliver, aspiring DM here, do you have any hot tips on how to develop a homebrew campaign setting?
So I would say it's funny. I actually want to kind of do like a YouTube series on this because I get asked this question so much and it's very hard to answer in like a short segment. So I feel like I want to kind of break it out. I think that if we want to start at the very beginning, the thing I always start with for my homebrew campaigns is something I call the catalyst, which is it should be a world event that is on such a scale that it changes the world completely. And that becomes the key point that your adventure hooks and the mysteries and the conflict and the opportunities of the campaign are connected to. So like I always use Eberron as a really good example for this. So in the Eberron campaign setting, you have the last war, this huge war between all these different nations, and it comes to a stop because one of the nations is completely destroyed and wiped out by a magical event called the Day of Mourning, and nobody knows what caused it. Nobody knows who's responsible. So everybody's afraid that it could happen to them next. And it creates this Cold War where there's peace, but everybody's spying on each other. That is an event that you can build so much of the campaign around, so much of the world is built around, because everything that happened before, it matters, but not directly to the PCs as much anymore, because now it's about their lives post this event. Avatar: The Last Airbender is another great one for this. It's got the whole thing of everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked. That's your catalyst event that puts all of the rest of the story into motion. And I think if you have an idea for that, and I think the DMG even lists a bunch of these types of events, it could be the rise of a new leader, but it shouldn't just be like a small scale. This is like an emperor who's taken over the world, or like a world-shaking cataclysmic event. A magical cataclysm is just happened and has changed the world forever. Like that's very Athos Dark Sun. I think those kind of things are a great starting point because they give you a bunch of questions that if you start answering them, they'll start developing your world and it'll make it very interesting. It's like a spider's web where you start with this point and then you answer questions and as it spreads out. That's what I do anyway.
I don't know if it was Dragon magazine I read way back when, or there was a world building supplement that came out for AD&D, but the piece of advice I really liked in there was to start small and work your way out. To not do more than you actually need. And I mean, you could even use that with what you just said. Like you had this big event, but you don't have to figure out all this stuff that's going on there.
No, absolutely.
Because you just have to figure out how's it going to affect the players and where they're at.
Where they're starting. Like if they're starting, I normally give the same advice of like start small, like start with like a small settlement and then 5 interesting locations around it. And they just need to have bullet points. You don't even need to go into detail with them. You have like your starting village or your starting town or your starting city, a few interesting places to go and explore. And then you just build it out from there. And then things like that event, that's like, okay, how did this town come about? Why is it here? Why are the PCs there? Those are the kind of questions that if you answer those, they'll help you build out an idea for sure.
Have you read any of the books, the Lazy DM series from Sly Flourish?
I've got them. I've got like the hard copies for the Lazy DM's Guide and the Lazy DM's Guide workbook and stuff as well, like that. Love those. For prep, the number one thing I recommend to people is like check out Sly Flourish's Lazy Guide. Like, I don't use everything that he does, but it was enough where it's changed a few things that I do that have saved me so much time for stuff like that.
Yeah, like that was the first place where I see someone saying the things that I was kind of doing in my games when I stopped preparing a lot of material.
Yeah.
And you know, if you're a new GM, I highly recommend checking out the Lazy DM and Sly Flourish, because you know, despite it being called the lazy DM, it's actually more about what to work on and what not to work on in order to optimize your time.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I mean, and it's that classic thing. It's like, I'm somebody who I can sit there and prep, you know, a session for 2 hours, and I love it. And like, I've got that time to do it, but not everybody does. Not everybody wants to spend that much time on it, but I just personally enjoy it, so I don't mind it. But for sure, like, just being able to cut it down and condense it just so that you're not, so you always feel like you're not wasting content that you've made, you know. Like, I feel like that's a big problem, that people, you know, new GMs will write out all this prep and they'll prep this a big adventure, and then when the players don't do it, they feel that that content is wasted. And it's getting into your mindset that, like, no, all of that stuff you've did, all you need to do is change a few things, and then you can put it somewhere else in the campaign, or you can make it the next thing that they do and they go to. But you've changed it, you've reskinned it, you've shuffled things around. And I think that comes from Sly's kind of idea of like the bullet points and the like, right, here's, have 5 interesting things about this, have 5 clues that you can drop anywhere in the campaign, have 5 things of this. I think that stuff is perfect for that kind of play.
Or advice where it's like, you can spend 3 hours working on this thing over here, or you can go over here and click download and probably get it for free and just use this professionally done map that someone else did.
Oh man,
that
and
is what
especially
you
now. And like, especially now, there's so many great tools and programs and map creators on Patreon. You can easily get so much good stuff. Like, when we were playing, it was, you know, you had to draw out the maps or go and print them out from the book and scan, and, you know, all of that kind of stuff. But now you can get stuff like Dungeon Draft and make a dungeon map, like, you know, click of the fingers basically. Or you can go and find something on, like, you know, somebody's Patreon and, like, you know, get 50-40 battle maps all professionally done that you can use those instead. It's amazing. It's so good that we've got all of these tools and resources now.
I'll use Dungeon Fog and I'll make some stuff, but only when I want something really specific,
custom.
But most of the time it's a combination of, oh, you know what, I need a Druid's Grove, I'm not going to make that, I'm just going to find one and use that. But then here's a specific thing, then I'll use Dungeon Fog for that. So there's definitely a lot of avenues. Guys are just spoiled nowadays. When I was a kid,
back in my day, we had to walk 15 miles to print a dungeon map. Yeah.
So Max has a good question to both of you. Sure. Just killed my first player character. Important distinction. We always make this mistake of saying players, and it's like, no, you killed the character, not the player. As a DM, felt really bad about it, but convinced death is part of D&D. Do you agree?
100%. I mean, so I've got a funny story about this. When we first started High Rollers, it must be, this is spoilers if you're going to watch the show from the beginning. This is out in our first campaign. So we did one campaign like for over 2 years. We finished it. We're now on our second campaign. But in our first campaign, within, I want to say something like, it was something like episode 8 or 9 or something like that. One of the player characters, Kim, her character did the classic newbie D&D player thing, went off on her own, thought that she could take on monsters because she was really tough and was, you know, super strong and whatever, and got killed. And she went off against 2 suits of animated armor as like a little level 2 or 3 PC and got her ass kicked. And she died. And it was like, she rolled the death saving throws and she died. And I will never forget, because we took a break and Kim came out and she was in tears. She was like, I've ruined everything. I've ruined the story. I can't believe I've done that. Like, what am I going to do? And I just remember I sat and I said, Kim, listen, this is part of the game. There's a reason that D&D has resurrection magic spells. There's a reason that, you know, there are death mechanics. This is a part of the game. And it's not the end. There are ways that your character can be brought back from, you know, from the dead. But even if it is, there's plenty more opportunities. You've not ruined the story. You're not going to change anything. This is fine. We can deal with this. And it ended up being one of the best parts. Like, it was such a great moment in the campaign that all of the audience who had never watched D&D, they were like, wait, characters can die? And that was like a clicking moment that they were like, oh my God, characters can die, and eventually the players went on a big quest and they had to do a big thing and they got her resurrected and things like that. And there were consequences for it, but it just became this moment. And I think it made sense for everybody watching, like, oh, this can be a cool part of the game. It's not a punishment. It's not oh, I should be sad that I've lost this character. This is an opportunity for something equally cool to happen in the game that can either lead to them being brought back or a new character coming in as well.
Yeah, I will even add to that, the death doesn't even have to mean anything. Like, it doesn't have to be important. It doesn't have to, because you know why? Life is like that sometimes, right? Yeah. There's sometimes just things happen.
Yeah, 100%. This wasn't even a big epic death. This was literally like a random dungeon room, 2 animated suits of armor. I can take them on. Oh no. And then, and it was just a nothing. It was just like a real random sort of encounter. And you're right. It sometimes that's how it is, especially in D&D. Like, you fail the saving throw or you fall in the trap and that's it. You're done.
Yeah. We're telling stories, but we're not writing novels. Is kind of the thing. And
it's a big thing.
And you hit the nail on the head. Just because the death didn't mean anything, it was kind of inconsequential in the bigger scheme of things, doesn't mean it can't become something. And that's the great thing about these games, is they change, they evolve. Again, why I don't write a lot of material in advance, because I know that that's going to happen. I know my players are going to do the unexpected. A character's going to die, and maybe the rest of the party now wants to go to the underworld to get them back. Okay, and that's what we're doing.
And it's a great moment for that character to grow as well. Like, if they get brought back from the dead, how is that change? Like, I always pose it as questions. Like, ask yourself questions like, how is this going to change how my character sees the world or perceives themselves? How is this going to affect their relationship with the party who have risked so much to bring them back? And it was a great moment, and it really helped the character grow up a lot. I think the character started off quite bratty and arrogant, and then, after this character came back, they could actually be like, oh, I've been very humbled. I now owe you guys for saving me. And it became a great bonding moment for the party that really set up the rest of the campaign, I think. 100%. I think it can definitely become a great part of the game. And I think that the idea, this is something where maybe the rules, the mechanics of D&D need to be a little bit updated to reflect this. But I think more players need to understand that failing in D&D it's not failing. Like, when you fail a skill check, that's not like a punishment. It's not something to be angry or stressed about. It just means that the story can go in a new interesting way. It can lead to interesting results and interesting avenues being opened up. Failing forward is a thing that's used a lot in indie RPGs and other systems, and it's something I'm trying to bring more and more into D&D, because I think it's a great way of thinking that, like, you can fail at something but you can still gain something from it. Because I think that sometimes people can get a bit sort of like salty when it's like, just rolled my 5th one in a row.
There's a game that I played by a great YouTuber, South African YouTuber that lives in Australia now, Gareth, DMG Info 7D System, Quest Givers.
Oh, cool.
Where that's how you advance. That's how you gain kind of experience, is by failing. That's how you improve your character.
That's how you learn.
Yeah. So
I love that.
So that I felt like that was a really fun mechanic, and also, as you got better at doing a thing, the harder it was to advance.
So it scales. Yeah. That's cool. I love that. Yeah. I know a few. I know there are a few systems out there that use the, like, when you fail, mark experience or gain experience. I think that's great. I think that's a really cool way of doing it. It's. I'd love to see like more variant options for XP and like how XP is gained in D&D. I think most DMs now have switched to like milestone GMing, or like, giving milestone XP rather than combat XP. I don't know if that's true. That's just an assumption.
I feel that way as well, but it also just might be the circles we travel in.
I think so, yeah, where it's a bit more narrative focused and sort of, story based.
We don't even, it's not even milestone for us. It's like every couple sessions we're just like level up, or when the GM feels like level up, and we don't track XP anymore. We don't track what players were here for what sessions. It's just like... I never do that stuff. I've been experimenting just before COVID happened. I haven't been doing it when we've been playing online, because it just becomes a bit more messy, but I've been experimenting with my own XP system. So I kind of created like a check sheet. So at the end of each session, it would be like, right, I'm going to give you XP for all the combat encounters, but
did somebody complete a personal goal this time? Okay, yes, you get X amount of XP, and it would scale based on their level. Okay, did somebody fail at a task that resulted in a consequence? Yes. Okay, you get XP for that. Like, it was like a checklist like that.
Yeah.
And I kind of think like it was a bit clumsy, but it was kind of working well because it also gave us a really fun post game, like, oh yeah, actually I did this cool thing and that could be that. And I'd be like, yeah, that sounds really cool. And we'd mark that off. And it kind of created like a cool post game scenario where we kind of wound down and talked about all the stuff that happened. So maybe that's like another way of doing it. Like, the combat XP is still clumsy as hell, but it kind of gave like a nice balance where the players felt like they had a bit more of a say in like how much XP they gained as well. They felt that they could make a case for like, oh yeah, but I did this thing, so I should get XP for it. And I'd be like, yeah, sure, there you go, that's some XP.
Yeah, I want to say back, it was our first 3rd edition campaign that we converted over from 2nd, that I was doing this really slow burn game where I was only giving them like quarter of the XP for most of the stuff, but then I would have like this hash mark system I would use, you know, and then I would just mark things off for players during the game, and they would get, you know, X amount of XP per hash mark, and I kind of graded them on a curve, like so the extrovert wasn't going to get as much XP for the cool RP stuff they did as the introvert who doesn't say much during the game, to kind of encourage them to do more.
Yeah, that's really cool. I like that. Like, kind of tailoring it to the different player types, because like not everybody wants to be the professional actor at the table and do all the epic RP, but when they do it, you know that's they've really put that effort in to do it, and it's quite meaningful. Or like the person who like never takes notes but remembers that really important piece of lore information that solves the puzzle or like convinces the queen or whatever, and like you're like, oh, they never take notes, I'm amazed that they remembered that, and you can kind of reward them for that and stuff like that as well. That's cool. I like that.
Yeah, but we've gotten way away from that nowadays, and it's just like and really like one of the problems with that was it was very punitive to the players that couldn't make it. Also we were very punitive to players that couldn't make it. Back then we were terrible people. It was like late 80s, early 90s.
Oh man.
So Michael has a question, probably like the last one we're going to take.
Sure.
How difficult was it to change Curse of Strahd so that Trott can have fun too?
Yeah, so this is so for our Curse of Strahd game, Chris Trott, who's one of the players, he ran Curse of Strahd for me and a bunch of other friends years and years ago. The new Curse of Strahd, so he knows everything. He knows like all of the little twists and turns and secrets and layouts and everything else. And when we were talking about it, we all agreed that Curse of Strahd, for all the rest of the players, it was the one that they were the most interested in playing. So me and Chris kind of had to have a conversation. I was like, listen, man, like you know it all. And I trust him as a player. Like, I know he would never metagame or anything like that, but I wanted to make it fun for him. So when we were all discussing it, I kind of made this thing of like, right, okay, I'm going to make some big changes so that he's still surprised. So he still has those, oh shit moments, because I know he loves those. And it really wasn't that hard. I don't want to say too much because it kind of gives some spoilers to some of the bigger changes that are yet to be revealed. But what I did is I basically went in and for kind of each of the main Strahd's laid out in a way where it's like these key locations. And I would basically look at the first couple that I knew that they would be encountering. And I'm like, okay, what can I change here that is a small change my end, so it's not tons of work for me, but kind of really dramatically changes the tone or the vibe or, a specific like element of the game. One of the ones which I will say about, if you've not watched my Curse of Strahd show, and if you're interested, plug your ears because this is a big spoiler. But one of them was, and this is like episode 3 or 4 that this happened in, when Madame Ava is doing her Taroka reading, which is like a big part of Curse of Strahd. You get these readings of where these special items and NPCs are. I had her killed by a shadowy assassin creature midway through the reading, and his jaw dropped. He was just like, I can't believe you've done this. And he's playing a character who is a Vistani. He was very connected to Madame Ava. So this was like a big challenging moment. And the last thing she does is she gives his character the Taroka cards. And that's like a big setup of like, okay, she's passing this, task to you now. You need to figure out what the next thing is. And that's been great for him because he knows how all the Taroka stuff works. He knows, the cards reference different things. So that's been a really fun way of him bringing in that knowledge into that game. But it also dramatically changes it because he was just like, but she's supposed to tell us where to go. What do we
Yeah.
do now? And it's kind of led to this whole thing. So yeah, that's been a lot of fun. But yeah, it's really just asking myself, okay, what small changes can I make that are going to change the bigger outcome of the whole thing? And there's still some big revelations to come that I don't want to say. So
That's super cool. I want to thank you for being on today. Any final thoughts or words before we head on out?
Honestly, just, keep playing D&D, keep being awesome, keep your tables open to everybody and anybody who wants to give the game a try. Support all sorts of creators. Go out there, find the smaller creators. I'm fine. My show does really well. You don't need to support me, but there's a lot of smaller creators out there. Go and show them support, because the more we build up this community, the better it's just going to be for everybody. That's really it. But thank you so much for having me on, man. It's been really fun chatting to you about this.
Yeah,
about this stuff.
absolutely. It's been great. We haven't interacted before, so it was cool to come on and chat and get to know each other a little bit. And thanks everyone for watching. Until next time, stay nerdy.
Bye.